have been in this role for a little bit over 2 years. Started right before the pandemic. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I just needed to approve that it's okay to live stream. Okay. So we work with the Slavic Eastern European community members, and if I were to name every nationality or cultural group, that would be quite a lot. But Russian-speaking folks who identify as survivors of sexual or domestic violence, the people we primarily work with. And we offer such a variety of services, and maybe I'll give a little bit of summary and speak a little bit about our prevention work, as this is the focus of this conference, of this particular panel. So we really offer this wraparound services for survivors, everything from support groups to mental health resources to legal resources, immigration resources, this one-on-one advocacy where I have an amazing team of advocates who are just so passionate and so good at what they do and really good at kind of walking alongside the survivors. Folks we work with have so many barriers, language barriers, trust to systems, and just the hesitancy to reach out for support. So having that trusted person there with them, kind of helping understand the systems, the intricacies of the systems, and also provide that empowerment that I can do it, so that we're receiving really good feedback from people, how helpful the service is. And in terms of our prevention work, we have been partnering with Slavic Media Center. It's our main outreach kind of platform, and they have so many followers and listeners of diverse Slavic Eastern European communities. And we have a monthly show for an hour and a half, and we bring up various topics. We talk about cycles of violence. We talk about what community-based advocacy means, various family interventions. Working with this community, we have to be very careful what language we use, because there's a lot of stigma around intimate partner violence, and particularly sexual assault is just heavy terminology. So we have to paraphrase and kind of introduce that topic in the way that sounds more welcoming to people. And to speak on that a little bit more, even how it unfolds in the room, like when we meet with our clients, when they come, like what it means to identify what sexual assault is, or sexual abuse is, and finding language. And sometimes it takes quite a bit of time to get there, really understanding what consent means and how to unpack that. And there's so much trauma that comes up with it too. So when we offer the opportunities for community to come and just learn about resources we can offer and how we view intimate partner violence in our community, we try to use softer language, but also be very direct that this problem in fact does exist, and how can we acknowledge and address it together. And maybe one more thing I'd like to share is we've done series of presentations with Portland Public Schools, and it's just been wonderful because that early intervention when we talked middle schoolers and some high schoolers in Portland Public School System, we were raising up topic of teen dating violence, and school community was just so engaged, and was a great participation and really good feedback. So we would like to continue doing that work as well, to offer that intervention to younger folks. And then what's coming out of our outreach, either we use the Slavic Media Center or our school outreach, we develop the connections when people then call us and reach out for help. So that's a good sign that what we're sharing out in the community is well received, and people develop that trust and feel like, yes, they can call us. Maybe I'll stop here. Yeah, is that a good summary? Okay.
That was a great summary. Thank you so much, Anya. Ellen, would you be comfortable going next?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hi, everyone. My name's Ellen Muzaich. I use she, her pronouns, and I work in the Native American Youth and Family Center in the Healing Circle as a domestic violence and sexual violence advocate. I identify as queer and as a survivor of sexual violence and exploitation. So that's kind of what I bring as my identities when working in this space. I reside on the stolen land of many of the tribes who made their home along the Columbia River, including Multnomah, Clackamas, Tualatin, Malaula, and many others as well. As far as what the Healing Circle works on, we're a program of culturally specific advocacy and case management services for Native American, Alaska Native, and Indigenous folks in the Portland area. We do crisis response, case management, as I mentioned. We also have a domestic and sexual violence support group that we run weekly. Right now it's run virtually for our participants, where they can share their stories and connect with other survivors as well, and kind of create community around the experiences that they have shared, and as well as their shared identities, many of whom are Native themselves. And then the other thing that we do as far as prevention that I am most involved in is I have been working closely with the staff members in the Many Nations Academy, which is an alternative high school on NAEA's campus. And we go into the health classes and partner with the teachers there to be able to speak about domestic and sexual violence with the high schoolers there. And so far that's been really successful. We've been having a great, connection with them, getting to talk to younger folks about what things they're really concerned about, what lived experiences that they have, and what knowledge they bring to the space. And then we kind of scaffold a conversation with them to inform them of cycles of cycles of violence, like Anya was saying, and then as well as just kind of defining terminology and getting kind of the word out about Healing Circle and why it's important to have culturally specific services available to young folks and to everyone throughout the community. So yeah.
Thank you, Ellen. Lorena?
Hi, I'm Lorena de Garay, and I'm with the Programa Hispano Católico, UNICA, and UNICA is underneath the service programs of the Programa Hispano Católico, and we have the DV, domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking programs. And a lot of our programs do outreach and prevention, but specifically at PAS program, because Prevención de Asalto Sexual is one of the programs that works with prevention. And what we try to do in our PAS program is work with students and parents in schools to create opportunities for leadership. And it's really a focus in building those skills and working with the schools and finding ways to bridge those gaps of communication within schools and parents and children, and really focus on those important issues around the prevention of violence in our schools.
Thank you, Lorena. And then last but not least, we have Jessica. I can't hear you, Jessica, even though it does look like you're unmuted. No worries. All right, that sounds good, Jessica. We'll wait a second for you to pop out and pop back in. Okay. That sounds promising.
I'm hoping that you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Apologies for that. We have very old computers here at SEI, so unfortunately they don't always work as intended. Thank you for bearing with me. So as I was saying, my name is Jessica Beatty. I work with Enhancement Inc. We are a culturally responsive organization who focuses on the Black community here in Portland, Oregon. Really appreciate this chance to kind of like identify positionality, because I would like to acknowledge that obviously I am not a member of the Black community. We are a Black-led organization and most of our employees are, but our ADSV team specifically tends to include a bit more diversity in that sense. I work as the rape prevention education advocate. So I am part of our anti-domestic and sexual violence team, but I also work very closely with the youth services team because our prevention program is focused mainly around high school students. We work in a lot of Portland public schools here, and I work very closely with the in-school coordinators to provide prevention programming in the form of classes through our after-school program, support groups, and one-on-one counseling as well.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's really interesting to hear, about panelists here really having either culturally specific high schools that they can tap into or culturally specific school programs that they can partner with. I think that that's something worth talking about more later. But to get us started, I wanted to find out from some or all of you panelists, how your agency developed its strategy or approach or curriculum for prevention. I think lots of organizations approach prevention differently. And I'm curious, like what you took into account and some of this, might predate you all, but hopefully, some of the history of this, because I think it's helpful for people attending if they're interested in starting a culturally specific prevention effort. How does one go about beginning that in a way that's meaningful and useful for the communities that you serve? And at this point in the conversation, I think it's fine for just any of the panelists to unmute and share when you want. And if something another panelist says kind of sparks something for you, feel free to just respond to that person. So is there anyone who would be willing to start us off on talking about how your program started and how you developed your strategy?
I mean, I can chime in real quick if that's okay, Claire. It's important to take note that El Programa Hispano has been around for about 35 years in the community, working with the Latinx community, and all of our members are bilingual and bicultural, and the majority of us do identify as Latinx or community members or immigrants. And our mission statement does say that we advance racial equity and social justice to the power of our roots, and that's something that we take into account when we created that curriculum. So really, when we interact with our community members and we try to advocate, interact with our community members through that culturally specific lens and taking into account those social contexts and that cultural relevance, right, in our prevention work and when we develop that curriculum. And it's always ever evolving, right? Things change, it's generational, things have changed over generations. Some kids from, parents came from different parts of the world and now they come here and they're growing up in a different society, in a different community. So we try to adapt our curriculum around that as well. And we also take into account the barriers that our community faces. And we put that, we try to place an emphasis on the positive pieces of our culture, right? What we can learn from our culture, how we can connect with one another through culture. So I think all of those things are taken into account when that curriculum is developed.
Others?
I can hop in here. Yeah, I think SEI takes a very similar approach, and it certainly predates my time there, but a lot of elevation of the culture. I know we take a lot of pride in our Center for Self-Enhancement located in Portland because it's a space for students to truly be themselves, be surrounded by people who look like them, be surrounded by people who relate to their experiences. We have a library that is stocked entirely by Black authors. All the art on the wall is entirely by Black artists. When we do cater events, we seek to go to Black-owned restaurants, and many of the people that we reach out to for those services are often even former SEI staff or participants. So really seeking to elevate and celebrate that culture. In terms of how we approach prevention, I mean, there's I'm the first preventionist officially hired by SEI, and we're taking a very educational level, but really prevention is something that is provided on every level at SEI with our wraparound services, because we're not only anti-domestic and sexual violence, we also provide housing support, job support, energy support, support in navigating DHS and things like that. And so all of our staff on every level is trained in how to work with survivors and how to just make sure that students' needs are met and make sure that students have that support network, which is on its core level violence prevention. That's something that we just ran a staff training for recently, but also just making sure that all staff is kind of capable and competent and confident in centering prevention at every single level of the work that we do and in every conversation that we have with participants.
Thanks, Ellen or Anya.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit. As far as the prevention efforts that we've done in the past, I know a lot of things have changed during COVID, as I imagine for everyone else's agency as well, that prevention has looked super different for us. Part of the changes that have happened during COVID, as well as just working remotely and all of the different adaptations we've had to make, such as like our support group's been virtual now for a while, which was, we used to host it in person, is we've had some staffing changes as well, which I think Jessica touched on. And so our prevention efforts in certain areas have had to start over or start from different ground than the ground we stood on before COVID. So the the way that I've started to do the work in Many Nations Academy was we just started by reaching out to the principals and the health teacher and seeing if that was something they had interest in, having us come and be a part of. And then after that, I worked directly with our health teacher at Many Nations to develop a curriculum and a 2 to 3 day workshop in the health classroom to figure out the way we wanted to present it was had to be really specific, because with Many Nations being an alternative school, there is a wide range of reading levels, of just comprehension in general, and being able to respond to all levels of folks who are in the space. Since the classrooms are not necessarily really grade level specific, it's about where people are at in their intellectual development. We had to develop a curriculum that could be framed for quite a wide range of folks of all ages and all abilities. And so the way that we started off is we started off in the classroom by doing an open-ended anonymous discussion with the youth. So letting them write down on a piece of paper or a Post-it what they knew or what they thought of when they heard the term. We started with domestic violence, and then we did the same thing with sexual violence, sexual exploitation, and letting them just put their ideas or their known knowledge up onto the whiteboard anonymously, so that they could put as much or as little was relevant or important to them to speak about. And then I got to bring those down, read off what that was said, and ask questions about things directly to the whole class versus to the individual youth that brought up that experience, in case that was a lived experience for them or something they were currently experiencing, so we could talk about it more generally. And then in those discussions we got to weave in some definitions of terms. We had a lot of questions about, well, what's the difference between sexual assault and rape? What's the difference between all these different things that youth may not have exact language around? And so we got to weave some education pieces, but also just general discussion about violence in the home and violence in general, and how things are handled in the legal spaces. A lot of the youth had questions about how things are prosecuted, how things, when you report a sexual assault, who is that getting reported to? Where does that information go? Confidentiality, that was something that we talked about a lot because they were curious about it. And we just let the conversation develop from there as to what was important to them and what felt relevant for them to discuss and ask questions about. And then we finished off by just talking about the relevance of culturally specific programming and why it's important to have safe spaces and confidential spaces to discuss what's going on, so that people can get the support that they need. I felt like that went pretty well. We got invited back to go back in the fall for the trauma unit to do a similar discussion related more kind of generally to trauma in that same style. So hopefully that goes well in the fall.
Thanks, Ellen. Anya, did you have anything you wanted to share about how your organization developed its approach to prevention?
Sure, yeah, I'll add a little bit. As I'm thinking about just offering information to people and the term curriculum, like now I'm trained as a social worker, and I always have to keep my kind of white sabers and complex in check, because what we might think is a great resource will not translate to when we deliver it to the community. And I'm really coming from a place when I came on board with Ross, the program has been closed for a period of time. So I came to kind of, well, not reinventing, because the program has a history of, since mid 1990s, but it was maybe a different vision. And I'm very much about survivor-centered approach, and really very gently, like building the trust and building the rapport first before we could even bring that topic, right? And as I mentioned in my introduction, when we offer it to the community, we want to ask what would be helpful, how can we talk about it, and maybe consulting with some of the community leaders that already have they're like elders and have the wisdom and have the trust of the community. Like, we would have meetings leading to those programs, really seek for their wisdom, how we could offer that information. And a lot of our community forums and one-on-one meetings with clients are very much about asking for permission and asking what would be useful. And then we're still in the process of, as a program, kind of get assess the community, like where community stands. And we have this wide spread survey that we're gathering feedback on what community thinks, and then kind of offering the intervention again based on the feedback we're receiving from people and where they're coming from.
I appreciate that so much, Anya. I think what I'm hearing and what you're saying is that, sometimes the more traditional approach is, for somebody to say, okay, well, this is sort of like the public health model of doing prevention. We're just going to like take this sort of stereotypical model and just apply it here, rather than going to the community and asking the community, what do you want to see with prevention? What's meaningful for you, right? And like requesting that the community give us that feedback so that we're creating a prevention program that's by and for the community, rather than maybe taken from scientists at the CDC or whatever, or a mainstream program, and assuming that it will work. And that kind of leads me to my next question for you all, which is, I think that traditional prevention, which, our participants in this webinar may or may not be familiar with, kind of your traditional mainstream, maybe like white-led organizations type of prevention, which tends to be like one-off workshops in high schools or middle schools, maybe on typical topics like consent or bystander intervention. And I think that is a form of prevention. I do think, though, a lot of culturally specific organizations have a more nuanced and inclusive definition of prevention. So my question for you all now is, like, how is your organization defining prevention? What have you all learned prevents violence in your communities? I mean that pretty broadly, but I also want to hear a little bit about, like, how do cultural ways help prevent violence? So how are you defining prevention? What have you learned prevents violence in your communities, and how do cultural ways help prevent violence? And any of you can unmute and share.
I think, reaching out and asking, what is prevention to you? What does prevention mean to you? And what should that look like is the number one thing that we're trying to do. And then, of course, taking in that cultural aspect, right? And taking into consideration the feedback that we're receiving from community members. What are sort of the things that you see embedded in our culture that kind of promote violence, right? The language, the practices, What are sort of those, that normalization of behaviors that we've grown up with, that we've seen through generations? Like there's always the saying that people laugh about, la chancla, and really we're working with chancla prevention, right? We're really trying to avoid that, right? But how does that feel when you live in a family that has been using la chancla for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years? And so discussing the normalization of behaviors that promote violence, and in kind of recognizing those behaviors, and then trying to create safe spaces where we can talk about how can we break away from that, but always based on what is your definition of prevention, and where would you like to see those changes, and encouraging healthy conversations among community members, among schools, among parents, among students. What kinds of things would students like to be hearing from their parents? What sorts of conversations would parents like to be having with their kids? And what sorts of things should be happening in our school to kind of promote those healthy conversations and safe spaces, and address those social norms and practices? So I think that's kind of like the approach that we do, and it's very community-centered, very culturally based, and really just taking into account what the community wants and needs at this time.
I could follow up just with a few thoughts that culturally rooted and community-centered, just like this language really resonates with me. And I want to add, trained as a clinical social worker too, I have privilege to process sexual trauma with people, meaning go in depth. And I realize the heaviness and the impact of the cross-generational trauma that folks have, and finding language for that, coming in tune with that feeling, working with that feeling, is a tremendous work. And acknowledgement of trauma, of violence in our relationship, and taking time and being very patient and humble when we approach that with survivors.
Yeah, I think something that I was thinking of that Lorena also brought up was kind of the cultural belief sometimes in certain communities that violence is part of our culture, or violence is part of our traditional values, when that isn't necessarily the case, but it can be the lived experience of folks who have been in that space for a long time. So I think one thing that we work to do, especially in our support groups, is holding space for folks who have that perspective or that belief informed by lived experiences of violence in their spaces, while also working to ideally kind of disconnect that belief that Native communities are inherently violent, or kind of the assumption that Native men are always violent, versus the individual lived experience of violence, and kind of making a disconnect from that, so that people can get reconnected with the important parts of community, with the storytelling parts of our support groups, the things that are really important and healing for folks, the medicine that people get from being a part of community and being able to tell their stories can be so important and so valuable. But that lives in the same space as the Native community is inherently violent because of the lived experience. So I think it's really important to do our best to leave space for everyone's experience, and then also discuss why those things might be associated together for them. And I think it's really hard to do that sometimes because of, like you said, like some families have had a long history, 30, 40 years of certain experiences. And so I think it's important to, I've seen a lot of growth in certain folks that I've worked with in our support group spaces, because they've gotten to hear the stories of people who have the same shared experience in their own families. And I think that that can be really healing.
And it's so deeply rooted, right? To be able to just like detach yourself from that. And how does that feel within a family that continues to practice this, right? How does that affect the relationships within families and communities that continue to practice in this way? So there's just so much in it. So thank you for sharing that, Ellen.
Yeah, I think it's really important also, especially in kind of the support group space that I'm thinking of, is a lot of times we have parents or mothers who are in the space talking about how they want to change kind of a history of violence that they may have experienced or may have witnessed in their lifetimes for the children that they're now raising. Especially in kind of, if someone's coming out of a domestic violence relationship, they may speak a lot during group about, wanting to make a disconnection from that history so that their children have a different experience. And I think that can be really, really amazing to hear, especially like women together wanting to support each other and mothering their children in a way that can be really healing overall.
And it's so empowering, right? And relearning all those dynamics of parenting and educating.
It also makes me think, Ellen, something you mentioned about storytelling or song singing, right? Like there are forms of finding language or expression of this tremendous pain, and healing is the art. Like it could be expressing in the form of a movement or a song, a prayer, or creating an art piece and playing with colors. And I've seen beautiful transformation happening using those modalities rather than trying to kind of frame it in the those terms of, language sometimes is not enough.
Yeah, thank you all for what you've shared so far. I want to make sure we're still like continuing to do what you all have been doing, which is really getting at specifics, right? I think when people are participating in this kind of workshop, it's most helpful when we're really talking about like the concrete ways these things manifest. So I'm really appreciating the examples of like storytelling or like working with parents, not just with kids, on parenting things as a way to do prevention. And Jessica, I know you might have more to share about how your organization is defining prevention and cultural ways of preventing violence. Will you share some of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I could relate quite a bit to what Anya and Ellen were saying specifically, both in terms of just really letting my students guide what prevention work means to them. I think one of the most crucial things that I learned when I was new in this role was from Megan Foster at the Oregon Sexual Assault Task Force, who quoted some statistic that says like the number one indicator, like influence in preventing violence is that in youth is that they have a trusted and responsible adult to turn to in cases of exposure. And so a lot of my job is just building relationships. And that can mean sometimes just taking a kid out for pizza once a week. And it might take 3 months until that kid is ready to open up and talk about what they're experiencing at home. But it's understanding, like Anya was saying, that trauma can't be rushed. And if I'm there to work through it with them, kind of recognizing that we are there to be that responsible relationship. I think SEI takes a really unique approach where we have a relationship model that states that every single SEI employee should be equipped to act as a parent, a mentor, and a teacher to each of our participants. And we play those roles in different ways, but a lot of that is coming from a culturally specific lens of providing resources and providing relationships that may have been historically denied to this culture. And then also kind of like what Ellen was saying, combating a lot of culturally held beliefs. We come from a slightly different lens of, like, I think the Black community, we can all agree and acknowledge that they face a lot more systemic violence. And so intimate partner violence and interpersonal violence is showing up in a different way where people might understand what is happening and might recognize that it's not ideal, but they don't feel comfortable calling in any sort of authority in those situations because the consequences of that could result in even more violence and even more trauma on a systemic level. And so a lot of our prevention work is based around bystander intervention and just changing understandings of how we can work with students to kind of create a culture of accountability where students can work with each other. We kind of focus on a leadership model of training up certain students who can then act as advocates within their community as well. And just really start this ripple effect of we all agree that this is, we're gonna, keep ourselves accountable and prevent this on a community level. I think another thing that I wanted to add in there was, again, like Anya was saying, that we do a lot of storytelling. Like our prevention classes are not typical, workshops of just here's what bystander intervention is, here's what consent is. but rather like we're hosting a podcast and it's a podcasting internship, but students are paid to share their voices and share their stories and act as leaders to their peers. Or working with a student who was expressing, you know, she's experienced a lot of exposure to domestic violence and she felt that she needed to get that rage out. And the number one thing that she wanted to do was to go to a rage room and to smash some things up for a while. And we're able to make that work and create that field trip where she and other students are also able to go to Vancouver and just break plates for a while and process their feelings in that way and get into their bodies. And just really not keeping this as a one-directional thing where we're acting as saviors or white saviors and telling them what they need or telling them what prevention looks like, but really listening to them and asking, how can we support you and create a structure where you feel empowered and there's just no need to add this violence into our lifestyle.
A couple of things that you said really struck me, Jessica. You know, you mentioned that there's sort of an approach or a policy at your organization around being able to be like a parent mentor. And that really strikes me because I think that really pushes back against sort of more traditional white supremacist ideas of social work, which is that that's like too close to get to somebody, right? Like you shouldn't be somebody's friend that you're working with or parent. I think also the fact that you're doing things like doing, you know, rather than doing sort of these lecture workshops with youth, you're doing these like longer form things like creating a podcast that takes time and energy. And so there's a pushback against sort of the white supremacist model of prevention, where it's about like doing one workshop with as many kids as possible in a high school in a year, right? And you're just like kind of trying to produce like, it's more about dosage and making sure that like the youth, you know, that change happens in relationship and that the youth are going to like true prevention will happen in these cultural communities when there's like depth and time spent with someone. I want to hear more from all the panelists about that. Like, what are ways that your prevention programs sort of push back against sort of traditional white supremacy models of prevention? And what are like the culturally specific ways that you're doing prevention? I think all of you have mentioned some, but I'd love to hear more about like, what does sort of the on the ground programming look like? And how are you actually doing it in ways that push back against like white supremacist models and are culturally specific?
I think within our program, it's just, again, creating those leadership opportunities to address root causes of violence in the community, like racism, discrimination, and all those other barriers that the Latinx community faces. And I think when we address this and we talk about it and we create safe spaces and leadership opportunities to have those scary but necessary discussions, we're providing a strong prevention framework. And it's all based on those cultural strategies, right? And it creates a connection to our culture. It creates a connection to our knowledge around these issues and barriers that are happening in the community. But then we can also reflect and value one another's experiences and pull from our culture to have a better understanding of what's happening in our community and kind of root ourselves in the positive things that are in our culture. And that can be through just a number of different ways when we're practicing prevention, like Jessica was saying, maybe doing a podcast or maybe getting together and doing something in a way that's very relaxed and very organic. And it doesn't have to be super formal. It doesn't have to be in a meeting setting, but somewhere where we can discuss our lived experiences and share those experiences and learn from one another and find opportunities to address this, right, in the more mainstream way.
Lorena, I'm going to ask you to be a little more specific. When you say leadership opportunities, what are some of the ways that your program is creating leadership opportunities for participants? Or like, I don't know if it's, I'm not sure if it's the youth or other community members, but
yeah, within the youth and with parents, question the things that are happening in schools, question the things that aren't working for you. Let's educate one another on what feels right and what doesn't, and who we can bring this topic to that we need to discuss more about. So creating leadership with parents, with kids, and in just kind of that platform, right, to open up that conversation in our community.
Do other people feel comfortable sharing on this question of, what are ways that your prevention looks different from like sort of more mainstream white models of prevention, and what are the culturally specific ways you're doing prevention? With the more concrete examples, the better, I think.
I feel like it's ongoing work for us as white service providers, and like I'm speaking about my training, it feels like it's kind of ingrained in us in a way, and we have to do a lot of undoing. But recognizing that when people come to us, like they offering a precious thing, right? Like there's so much trust, and there's so much I think viewing us as a figures of authority, right? And in some cultures, so recognizing that and making them the center of that space. And I want to share a story. I hope it's a good one, but to share a story that's totally unconventional, right? But maybe it would speak to how organic and spontaneous that experience of healing can be. So I was working with a survivor in my therapist capacity, and it was just very difficult to even come to a point of where they felt anywhere close to speak about what happened to them. And I have a little banjo in my therapy room. And then we tried something totally unconventional this one time where I started just strumming on my banjo, just playing a little music. And this person like felt it so strongly and went into this like movement, and it was crying and healing and kind of like expressing without using any language, right? And then it was like this embracing and the hug of like the healing in action, were that completely unexpected, and trying my interventions and my evidence-based practice techniques, and like nothing really worked until the music came into the room, and it was just magic happened. I don't know, like something happened. So being open to what people bring to us and what might work for them. And now, Claire, I want to touch on like what you've said is like the relationship with us and people, like who are we as a service provider, or a mentor, or a friend, or a family member, or who are we in that role? And I think maybe I'll leave it as just questions, right? Because it's okay, like for me, I think it's okay to feel love to someone. I know we in the Western kind of rigid, almost like medical model kind of setting, think of like all these boundaries and ethics, right? But that human to human connection is just so powerful. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I think one of the things that's been really hard for us is, I think one of the things that Anya just said is like that human to human connection, and being able to, whether that's physical touch and like a hug or anything like that, but just like having two humans in a room interacting versus having humans interacting over phones or over Zoom. Since my work has started with NAIA in the last year, been about 10 months in this role, we have been virtual the whole time. We have not gone back into the office. And so I think a lot of the work that we've been doing has been kind of limited in the scope that we would normally do. The support groups that we're doing virtually have been going really well, but they've also been limited to how well people can support each other over Zoom versus supporting each other in a shared room. How can someone in support group is sharing their story and doing storytelling and starts to get emotional, and another group member holds their hand while they finish their story. I feel like those pieces that are really important to kind of our way of doing support groups and our way of supporting participants has been limited in the time that I've gotten to spend in this role. And so I'm having a harder time speaking to some of the specifics of that because of the limitations of the pandemic has put on us. And we're going to continue to be virtual for quite a while, is what it seems like going on right now. And so I think that that's something that's made things more difficult and also has slowed a healing process even more so than we would normally hope that someone would be able to move through some of the things that they've experienced.
Ellen, I'm sure, you know, obviously you're still doing some prevention virtually. I'm curious, like, what are the cultural ways that you're doing it that do come through? I don't know if there's ways you've adapted curriculum to speak to the youth you work with in a more culturally specific way. I'm wondering if you could share any examples like that.
Yeah, as far as the time that I've spent when speaking with youth, a lot of times the questions that are coming up for them that they're wanting to discuss is when things are shared with an advocate or when things are shared in that way, when or how is it shared with law enforcement or with other folks in the kind of legal community? That is something that's a huge concern to the youth that I've spoken to. And so we've had to have some really open discussions about when things need to be shared, what's the difference between a confidential advocate and a mandatory reporter, who are confidential advocates that you can speak to. Why is being a mandatory reporter in certain roles really important, but also may not be helpful for when you're wanting to share your story without necessarily involving law enforcement at that point yet. So giving them that option to kind of have control over what information is shared or not shared, especially with the violence that can come from sharing information with law enforcement, kind of like Jessica was speaking to, like some cultural and community level distrust of law enforcement and the legal system in the Native community can be really difficult. And so having those open dialogues with the youth in the classroom, I feel like has been really helpful. And they seem to respond really well and have lots of questions about the best way to share information, or like how information is going to be handled when it is shared with certain folks. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's a really good example, and similar to what Jessica was sharing. And I know that happens in Lorena's program too, that there's ways that traditionally things are discussed in mainstream prevention programs that might be discussed in a different way because you're taking into account like the unique needs or issues that come up in your community. So I think that's what I'm hearing and what you're saying. Jessica, did you have anything you wanted to share about like the cultural ways that your organization is practicing prevention and how it's different than mainstream prevention?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I touched on that a little bit earlier, but I think I will just add, like, sorry guys, this long form approach really does make a difference in terms of the comfort level of students. Like a lot of the reason that we do offer one-to-one counseling in addition to support groups and drop-in groups is for that distinction between mandatory reporter and confidential advocate. Like, I know that for myself, I am a confidential advocate who does not function as a mandatory reporter in private conversations, but in group settings, I do still have that role of a mandatory reporter. So usually what happens is I meet students through either referrals by their in-school coordinator, or they feel comfortable coming to my drop-in group where we're just playing games, sharing food. Like, it's a lot more comfortable and casual, and that creates the space for students to approach a setting in a context like this and really join into the conversation in a way that feels welcoming and not intrusive and not intimidating. But it's been really incredible to kind of speak to some of that person-to-person interaction and magic that we were talking about before, to see people opening up. I think one of the unique issues that we face with the Black community is just this idea, again, of over-policing. Our motto at SEI is life has options. And so I think it's really important to approach students and recognize that when we're doing prevention work, it's not coming from trying to police their actions or trying to take authority over how they use their bodies and how they interact with their peers, but rather equipping them with tools for communication and facilitating healthy relationships. And that was certainly one of the challenges that I faced when I was new at the role, was specifically connecting with students who identified as male, and specifically straight male. But it's been amazing to watch that grow and see the vulnerability that they're willing to share, usually initially within a group with their peers. But even that is incredible to see a group of high school boys coming together and coaching one another through how to relate to the girl troubles that they're having, and like really sharing that, and not in any sort of overtly macho or toxic masculine way, but in a way that's really just like peers trying to support each other in this relationship. And I see that from one-to-one conversations as well, but I think it's even more powerful when it's coming from peers as opposed to like from myself as a social worker. So I think it's just creating, like, facilitating space within the Black community where students can have that conversation. And that's something that historically, culturally, they might not be comfortable initiating, but when space is created for them, they're absolutely comfortable engaging.
That's really helpful. I think I've been hearing from each of you quite a bit about like strengths within the culture, as well as like maybe some barriers that have developed in the culture to preventing violence. I want to broaden that now a little bit and ask, like, what barriers do you face to implementing your programs or to doing your prevention work beyond from within the cultural communities that you serve? So thinking about like funding, thinking about the schools that you partner with, parents of the youth that you work with, et cetera. What are some of the barriers that can make it challenging to do the kind of unique culturally specific prevention work that you all want to do?
I know that for me, there's kind of a couple different levels of that. Within SEI, like, there's a lot of, because we do handle prevention work on like a wraparound level, starting as the first ever preventionist that we have had at our agency can be a bit of a challenge just for kind of getting students and staff and the schools that we partner with on board with how my role is different and why it's valuable. That's something that we're definitely seeing more success in as I have more time to integrate, but we're really building our program from the ground up for the time being. Beyond that, it's kind of similar, but for SEI as a whole, it's sort of getting the schools that we partner with and other social service agencies run by, the county or the state to recognize why we as a culturally specific community are more equipped to deal with this particular community than a mainstream system. I think there can be a lot of defensiveness there about, we have guidance counselors at school. Why do we need in-school coordinators or advocates as well? And just sort of continuing to show up and foster relationships and show that we can take these specific needs in these specific communities into consideration and prioritize them in a way that they might not be prioritized in a mainstream system.
Everything that Jessica just said, everything. It's the same. And just recognizing and acknowledging that our community faces so many different barriers that the mainstream community doesn't face. And that's the reality. And really just being able to acknowledge that, I think, but everything that Jessica said, I have to completely agree with. Yeah.
Thanks, Ariana.
I'm going to copy that too. Yeah. Everything that Jessica mentioned resonates. I want to add a little piece on just presence on social media and how we talk about it because of the diversity of our communities. Language we choose or how we deliver that information is very strategic. So we offer community forums, we building up a social media presence, and it's taking time, but we're very consistent and believe that we post good content, community gatherings, and we also publish articles for folks who don't use technology and to prefer to read magazines, and we are very thoughtful how we deliver to each kind of group within our community and how we talk about it. Not maybe exactly about addressing barriers, but in a way it is like how do we talk about this issue? Yeah, because it doesn't translate the same way.
I think that, oh, sorry. I was going to say, I think one of the barriers that I've noticed in my work so far that has come up a lot for me specifically, but also for other folks in my agency, is not all of us identify as Native or Indigenous. So I personally don't identify as Native. But at the same time, there's also a lot of folks who don't identify as survivors of or have lived experience within sexual violence. And so for some of the providers that I work with, they may be able to speak to domestic violence or sexual violence in a in I don't know how to word it, just like don't have that level of lived experience that some of the folks that we're working with have. And so that level of understanding may not be there, but at the same time, I hold a similar barrier in the sense that I don't identify as Native. And so I don't necessarily have some of the same lived experience that some of the participants I work with have. And so I think that sometimes there can be a barrier for folks, especially folks who have only worked in the domestic violence kind of field first, and then are now trying to work in the sexual violence or sexual violence prevention area. Don't have those same experiences to be able to speak to, or be able to speak to the level of trauma that can be experienced after the fact. So I think that's something that's come up for us when, especially in spaces where participants are storytelling or sharing things, that can be a bit of a discomfort for someone who's not been someone who's experienced sexual violence, or might not be able to speak to some of those kind of same shared experiences.
Thank you all. And for our last question before we sort of wind down to our Q&A time, I'm curious what successes you all have seen as a result of your culturally specific approach to prevention. You know, what accomplishments do your prevention programs have that you could share with us? What growth have you seen? What sort of feedback have you gotten from participants? And again, the more specific and the more examples you give, I think the better.
I think a sense of empowerment. It's so important, right? Just that sense of empowerment with survivors, with family members, with children, and knowing that there is a safe space, knowing that they're not alone, knowing that someone is there to listen and that somebody understands them through that culturally specific and trauma-informed lens is so important. I mean, that's the one thing that I wanted to mention as well. I think that's a barrier that we face, is that many are not trained through that trauma-informed lens, right? We can't all have that cultural knowledge. Maybe we all don't have that lived experience, but we can sure learn that trauma-informed lens, right? And it's so important. So I think empowerment is one of the big successes, and validation, and feeling safe, feeling like they're in a safe space to have those organic conversations and feel supported. I think that's a huge success.
I think one of the successes that I've heard a lot from the participants I'm working with is how much they've gotten to empowerment, and also just like that level of confidence of being able to talk about their stories, especially after hearing other folks who have the same experiences share their stories so powerfully and confidently in the support group space. Even though, like I said, the barrier of it being virtual can be somewhat limiting, I think that the virtual space that we've created thus far and hope to eventually have in person can be really healing for folks, and be able to talk about the things that they need to talk about, and also to witness others talk about the things that have happened to them. I know that when I've talked to someone recently, they had never been in a space where other people were talking so openly, and so not tiptoeing around things that have happened to them, just like really speaking openly about maybe a level of exploitation that they've experienced, and how that can be really empowering to just hear it said out loud, because that might be the same experience they're having, or even an experience they know other family members are having, but they're not hearing that verbally in the same way that they've heard it in that space. And so the space that's been cultivated there by the participants and by the facilitators has been really beautiful and really healing.
Ellen, you kind of shared some successes already about your prevention work in the high school. Is there anything else you would want to share about the prevention work in the high school and, accomplishments there that you've seen in spite of COVID?
Yeah, sure. I know I did mention a little bit already that we got invited back for next fall. So that was something I was excited to hear about. We initially were just planning to do springtime domestic and sexual violence conversations, but we got invited back to come in the fall to talk more generally about trauma, and then kind of hopefully lead the trauma conversation into domestic and sexual violence later in the year next spring. And just having my face or other Healing Circle faces in the classrooms more often so that they know that they can reach out. We've also had, since getting to talk to those folks and those youth and getting to, pass out our hotline number, we've gotten calls from folks that have gotten connected through those conversations. So getting folks connected that may not have necessarily even really known Healing Circle was there, or having family members get connected through us because of those conversations is very rewarding. It feels good. You want to get people the help that they need.
I can totally echo what's been said already. And also, I think, Ellen, you just reminded me of another thing that adds to the answer to this question as well. But yeah, just this idea of getting people connected to the help that they need. Specifically for me, it's been a really unique success to, like, I started off with a very small caseload at the beginning of the year that was primarily through referrals from coordinators of students who we knew had experienced this. But at this point, I am getting primarily referrals from other students, where essentially a student confides in a friend that something is going on and the friend refers them to me. And it's great just to see that there is that trust and confidence and that they recognize this as a resource and as an opportunity for them. But in terms of the empowerment, I think that's like, I tend to go like approach anything that I'm doing with youth as with a goal of inspiration. And I've really been able to see that a few times, like the example that I gave before with the rage room, or with teenage boys really opening up and becoming vulnerable with each other. I had a student just last week tell me, I'm sorry, I've never actually sat down and talked about my feelings with someone before. So to see him be brave enough to take that step and be vulnerable in that way was a really incredible moment. And even just things like last summer, we ran summer programming for about a month, and towards the end of it, kids, you could tell, were feeling a little bit burnt out. It was their first time back in any sort of school setting since the onset of COVID. And so as much as they were enjoying the activities that we had planned, they also were, waking up early and commuting and being around people and wearing masks for long days for the first time. And so we heard that feedback, and we planned a Wellness Wednesday where we were able to just grab a whole bunch of yoga mats, get a bunch of fresh pressed juice from a former SEI participant who now owns their own business creating juice. And we went and sat out on yoga mats and did stretches, and we'd had students submit anonymous questions the class prior. And so when we sat out there, we just sat in like talking circles and answered those questions. And there were kids who were not enthusiastic about it when we were grabbing our yoga mats and heading outside, who by the end of it had taken their sweatshirts off and were fully like starfished on the mats and just saying like, this is great. I've never sat out on the lawn like this before. So seeing things like that is a really incredible experience, to see kids really open up and push themselves out of their comfort zones a little bit. And for me, I sometimes feel like, I'm getting away with something, but that doesn't feel like work to me. That feels like a really incredible opportunity. But at the same time, it is prevention work, because it's creating an environment in which students feel comfortable being authentically themselves, feel comfortable experiencing these models of healthy relationships and healthy communication. So I just feel very fortunate to be part of being able to share this with students.
That's a great example, Jessica. Thank you. And Anya, did you have anything you wanted to share, successes from your prevention work?
Yeah, all along the same lines that you all were sharing. When we go from that people feeling hesitancy to ask for help, we get calls when people start talking and then they say, no, I'm not ready. Right, and the call just drops, and or if I have an opportunity, a welcoming message is like, thank you for calling, because we're recognizing how difficult it was to make that first call. So that initial connection, that initial welcoming space, and if it's not the right time, it's okay too. Like, we'll be here when it is the right time, and people do call back. And after working and working through the barriers and receiving that healing, there is a kind of passing on that it's a safe place. You could trust them. So when we get referrals from community members because they heard that it's a safe space, this is always such a great indicator that we're positioning ourselves in this very welcoming kind of way for the people. Yeah. Um,
Well, thank you all for answering those many questions. I'm now going to move us on to the Q&A section of today. So I will open it up to our audience to ask questions. I think the best way to do that would to have people raise their hands. And you can raise your hand by clicking on the little smiley face in the bottom bar of your screen. And when you click on it, there should be the option to raise a hand. And that way I can kind of keep track of who has raised their hand and who make sure everybody gets a chance within time to speak and in order. And I do see that, Juliana, you have your hand raised, but I know it's been raised for a while, so I'm not sure if it's still an active question.
Yes. Well, it's a comment and a question. First of all, someone said, I hope I'm saying it right, La Changla. They brought up that word or that term, and I didn't know if everybody understood what that meant or if what it meant to me meant the same as everybody else. I immediately pictured grandma taking off her shoe or grandpa taking off his belt. And right after that, something bad's going to happen. But I believe that's the term correctly. I wanted to make a comment that my son, when I was going to visit him, wanted me to watch the movie or the series Reservation Dogs. And as we watched that, after we finished watching, there was like 5-10 minutes of just silence as we absorbed what we saw. And he said, "What do you think of that, Mom?" And I said, we laughed at some of that, and because we recognized ourselves and different people in it. But it's kind of sad that it talks a lot about our violence, as a culture, as a community. And that was something I thought, oh, that's kind of a teaching moment. The language in that show is really bad, but it's a hard look at ourselves, food sovereignty, harvest sovereignty. I think as a traditional cook, I'm looking forward to this summer, working at summer camp and teaching kids food sovereignty, harvest sovereignty ideas. And something I was talking to a group of traditional cooks about this morning, we were having a little chat, that I see something that makes me really happy, and that is the way we're teaching now I've really noticed a shift, decolonizing. So not a Catholic boarding school approach or response. So if somebody asks a question about how you do something, it isn't, they aren't punished for a wrong question, or they're given a more fearless approach to learning. I really like that. So we're all together fearlessly exploring, what does it mean to have food sovereignty? What does it mean to harvest with sovereignty? As stewards of the land, it's important that we know. And how to take healthy risks. What is a healthy risk? And how can we do that? Our ancestors took a lot of healthy risks. And how can we promote that with our kids and encourage them to be brave and courageous, whether they're asking a question or they're trying something new? We want to give them that strength to take a healthy risk. That was my what I wanted to share.
Thanks for those comments, Juliana. I think you touched on a lot of ways that cultural connection can be prevention work, and also ways that, as other panelists mentioned, we can look at colonial violence that our cultures have internalized, and how we can undo some of that.
I want to say one more thing, and that is I'm really happy to see the tribes as stewards of the land, as stewards of the water and wildlife. I know at our schools, we have 6 outdoor classrooms, each one with an environmental zone. and a working fish hatchery. So the kids raised 500 steelhead this year and reintroduced them to the river. And that meant they had to feed them every day, every day. They had to care for them every day. And just recently, each child at that school got their fish, named their fish, made a wish with that fish, and returned it to the water gently. And I think it was life-changing. A lot of the kids say that's one of the most important things they feel that they've done all year. I think that's cool. I think our kids need experiential learning.
Did anybody have any responses they wanted to share with what Juliana said in the panel?
Yeah, the chancla, you are correct. It's usually la chancla is the shoe, and it's usually comes from grandma or mom historically. And I know we all laugh when we see Disney movies, with Coco, everybody's crying. I cried, I bawled in that movie, I identified so much in that movie. But the chancla, right? It's really funny, but it just, as you said, kind of perpetuates that stereotype of violence and just kind of like brings in that stereotype of this is how our culture does it. And it's not necessarily true, right? That's what we're trying to break away from.
I think just even the being in a classroom with other people who can give those examples is going to be a more meaningful way to talk about violence, right? So if somebody comes into your classroom from outside your culture and the examples of interpersonal violence that they're giving aren't relevant to your life, then it's not going to be as meaningful as if somebody who speaks Spanglish comes in and says la chancla and everybody knows what they mean. Then there's a deeper connection instantly, and that's part of culturally specific prevention. Go ahead, Ellen.
Oh, I just was going to say that kind of the representation in reservation dogs was also something that has come up in support group, that's come up in conversations with participants. That's something that they want to talk about, and they want to kind of discuss things that were brought up in that show, or like Juliana was saying, like the versions of themselves that they see in the characters is really special to a lot of people. And so it is something that's come up, and it's been really awesome to have a kind of like that visual representation to be able to speak to in those spaces.
I just want to add on here too to the conversation about La Chancla and kind of tying it back in with an earlier conversation. I gave a staff training for all of our staff a couple of months ago that was about sort of recognizing signs of domestic violence, how to act as a mandatory reporter, how to navigate, a balance between preserving our relationships with our clients while fulfilling our roles as mandatory reporters. And something that came up in every single session of that was, punishment and family dynamics may look different in the Black community. And so abuse is really like to the eyes of the beholder, like it's open for interpretation. And I think that's another way that we at culturally specific agencies have the unique opportunity to serve our client bases, is to sort of work as cultural interpreters in order to translate to the social agencies that we may have relationships with, like DHS or like school systems, and have the opportunity to step in and act as cultural interpreters and to redefine what's happening, that a white saviorist teacher might come in and identify something as abuse, but recognize that that's just how this particular family dynamic works in this case, and it's not cause to get government services involved.
Any further questions from our audience?
Claire, I had one question that was sent directly to me. Do you mind if I read it?
Not at all.
I just asked, how often do DV caseworkers check in with their participants? Generally, it depends on the level of crisis that the person is in, for NAIA at least. And I tend to check in with folks weekly for an hour is what I hopefully get to do each week. Depending on their level of crisis or need, we may increase or decrease that. But as a general rule, I usually spend about an hour a week with each participant.
Thank you, Ellen. Any other questions from our audience? Yeah, Angie.
Hi, I just wanted to know how, if I don't even know how to ask this question, but what keeps coming to my mind is about resilience. And is there any way that you measure that in working with your population? And do you try and measure that with each individual? And because in working with them in prevention, isn't that to build resilience and kind of helping them with leadership in their own lives? So I was just wondering, is there any way you measure that, maybe after 2-3 months of working with them or them being in the program? Are they, I don't know how to say it, but do they finally realize, hey, my resilience is, I have resiliency now, and who recognizes that, or who helps them to recognize that within themselves? Because that's a huge strength. And anyway, whoever wants to answer it, that's fine. I just was curious.
I could answer that a little bit, or I can speak to for Naya at least. Kind of two parts. One, we, as far as measurements, I don't know about specifically resilience, but one of the measurements that we do is at the beginning of services during intake, we have a survey that we send out that has a ton of different questions about things that they're experiencing. I usually send it to them via email for them to complete after intake. And it also asks them about their beliefs about traditional values of Native Americans, and also if violence is part of our traditional values or not. And then we send out a follow-up survey, usually about, it kind of depends on how long the person is with us. So either at the end of services or maybe after 90 days or 6 months, with the same information. And the survey is anonymous so that we can kind of get that data. But kind of on the same token, I have a short story that I could tell just about some resilience that I recently got to experience with somebody and got to validate with them. Is I've been working with someone for a little while who came out of a pretty tough situation, and they recently, after I think we've been working together 6 or 8 months, they recently went on their first date after a really tough experience that they had, and the date went really well and they had a good time, but they decided after one date that I don't feel like this is the kind of person I want to be with for reasons A, B, C, D. It just didn't feel like a good fit for me. And they decided to set those boundaries with the person, like by calling them and letting them know that they had a great time and that they're not interested in seeing each other again. And so it was really sweet to get to hear that she, one, had a great time, and what in other conversations early in our time together, she had spoken about how she never thought she'd be able to be in a romantic relationship that was safe again. So for her to be able to go out on a date and have a good time and then still say, you know what, this isn't for me, and set those boundaries on her own. That wasn't something we safety planned or discussed. This was something that she just brought up on her own. And so getting to validate that she had done that on her own and got to set those boundaries without any support or pre-planned conversation about it was really special.
I think we would have time potentially for one last question if anybody has one. All right, it looks like we are done with questions. So I just want to once again thank our panelists for coming today and being willing to share their expertise on culturally specific prevention with this group. Thank you everyone who attended. It's so wonderful to see so many folks here. And please know that we have 3 more trainings coming up this month. Hopefully you're aware of those since you signed up for this one. Abby, is there anything else we need to share wrapping this up?
I don't believe so. You'll be receiving communication again from me with reminders about upcoming webinars as the weeks progress. So look out for those reminder emails, and thank you to everybody who attended and contributed to the conversation today. I think this was a really great way to kick off our SAAM events. So thank you.
Great.
You all.
Thanks, Abby. See everyone soon.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much for
Claire. Thank you,
organizing and
Abby.
bringing us together.
Thanks,
Gracias.
everyone.